From the Gulf States Newsroom, this is the Gulf States Gumbo, your weekly serving of stories from Alabama, Mississippi, and Louisiana. I'm sports and cultural reporter Joseph King, chopping it up this week. On today's show, we're on the water. We take a trip down the Mississippi River with teens taking in the great outdoors. And regulators want old oil wells in the Gulf cleaned up. But some states have sued, saying it will crush independent oil companies.
We employ about 390 people. We employ probably another couple of hundred. For us, having to post all this collateral would cause the company to go bankrupt.
That's all coming up on the Gulf States Gumbo. There's no shortage of dangers on the Mississippi River. Pitfalls include fast currents, submerged trees, and toxic waters. But for more than 2 decades, a canoe company in the Gulf South has been teaching kids not to be afraid of the country's primary waterway. Last spring, our environment and communities reporter, Danny McArthur, took us on a ride down the river. They joined a group of kids learning about outdoor adventure and efforts to help protect the mighty Mississippi.
Nearly 24 kids filled 3 canoes on a Saturday spring morning near Helena, Arkansas. They call themselves Mighty Mighty Quapaws. It's the Mississippi. 17-year-old Jade Stokes helps paddle as the sun shines overhead.
I want to come every time, but I would just complain every time, but I still like it. I just forget how hot it be and just, I think about this part, not about the canoeing part.
She says being out on the river is like an escape, away from the city and all the other distractions in her life.
My phone barely works out here, so I'm not on my phone, just them and water and fruits and stuff, so it's like taking me away from the actual world.
Trips like this are common for the Quapaw Canoe Company. Its name comes from the Native American tribe whose ancestral homelands were along the Mississippi River, before the U.S. government forced them out of their territories. Quapaw's goal is to teach kids to respect the river. Clarksdale, where the company's main base of operations are in Mississippi, is a predominantly Black community. So getting people involved also means helping expose youth of color to the great outdoors. 17-year-old Jadarius Carter was 11 when he took his first trip down the river.
I was kind of scared. I thought I was going to die because I didn't know how to swim yet.
Carter and the other kids are here as part of Spring Initiative, an after-school program based in Clarksdale.
And then I started actually coming more and more on canoe trips and more like that, being on the river, because I ended up starting liking nature.
After 9 miles of paddling, the group arrives at Montezuma Island. River guides say it was created by a sinking steamboat of the same name. The kids help pull the canoes onto the sand and then take a break with a picnic lunch.
Oh yeah, my hot dog finna get cooked for real. Look at that fire. Yeah, it's working. Look, it's hold on.
John Ruskey started the Quapaw Canoe Company 25 years ago. In that time, they've done thousands of wilderness expeditions by canoe, kayak, or paddleboard along the lower Mississippi River.
We're creating a culture of Clarksdale youth who have fun in a place that they've been told to fear their whole lives. You know.
After about an hour or so resting on the island, the group paddles to Montezuma Landing, about half the distance back to Clarksdale.
Are you guys going to say bye to our guides?
Bye. Thank you.
Ruskey says, with climate change and more extreme weather events, it's becoming extra important for everyone to learn to do a better job of taking care of the environment.
The kids that we're taking out on the water today will become the next generation of adults who are living near and making decisions about this great waterway and all of its wild and wonderful beauty.
And they've taken on apprentices, like Valencia Metcalf. She's 26 now, but started when she was 16. She says canoeing taught her to not be scared of the river, and instead appreciate nature more.
And I know water can't talk, but just sitting out there, I don't know. It used to make me so emotional. Like, it felt like nature was speaking to me.
She doesn't canoe much these days, but says she still thinks about her experience with Quapaw in little ways, like not littering.
Everything that goes on the ground, if you don't throw it away, it goes to the river, and that affects the fish living in the water and everything.
Back on the Mississippi, the kids are building new memories in the canoes, singing Mariah Carey. And in 1 to 2 weeks, there will be another group of kids on the river, learning to make their own connections with the Mississippi. For the Gulf States Newsroom, I'm Danny McArthur.
The Mississippi River empties out into the Gulf, where the Bureau of Ocean Energy Management has rescinded protections for the Rice's well. As Eva Tesfaye reports for partner station WWNO, the critically endangered species is specific to the Gulf.
The approximately 50 remaining Rice's whales in the Gulf are protected by the Endangered Species Act. BOEM rescinded its notice to lessees, a set of guidelines for industries operating in the Gulf on how to follow that law and avoid hitting the whale when sailing on the water. Steve Mishuda is an attorney at Earth Justice, an environmental law nonprofit. He says even losing one female whale could jeopardize the entire species.
It is the most endangered large whale species left on the planet. And so that is all the reason in the world to take every measure we possibly can. There is not room for error here.
Last year, congressional leaders from Gulf states stalled NOAA's plan to protect the whales. It would have designated almost 30,000 acres of the Gulf as critical habitat. In New Orleans, I'm Eva Tesfaye.
The Gulf States Newsroom is a team of journalists working with NPR and local public media stations in Alabama, Mississippi, and Louisiana to cover the issues that matter to you. Email us, connect@gulfstatesnewsroom.org.
There are thousands of oil and gas wells in the Gulf that are no longer producing. That's causing an environmental and economic problem at the time when the Trump administration wants to keep drilling for more oil. The Bureau of Ocean Energy Management finalized a rule last year to help ensure the old wells are cleaned up and protect taxpayers from shouldering the costs. But a few Gulf states sued the office, saying stricter criteria for cleanup will crush independent oil companies. Our reporter Danny McArthur and Eva Tesfaye are back together to talk about the impact of these changes.
Hey, Eva.
Hi, Danny.
So there's all this leftover infrastructure in the Gulf. Can you give us a sense of how big this problem is?
Yeah, as of 2023, there's almost 3,000 wells and 500 platforms that are overdue for decommissioning in the Gulf. That's according to a report from the Government Accountability Office that came out last year. And that's likely to increase because the infrastructure is aging, leases are coming to an end. But the big problem is that these wells and platforms are polluting the water, especially if the wells are leaking methane. They could also pose a problem for navigation, for the fishing industry, and even the oil and gas industry itself. And environmental experts told me that because it's the Gulf, there's always a chance a storm could come by and knock things over and make this all worse. That same GAO report also says the Bureau of Ocean Energy Management, or BOEM, isn't doing enough to make sure this infrastructure is getting cleaned up.
So let's back up a little bit. How has BOEM handled cleanup in the past, and what does the new rule do to improve cleanup?
Yeah, so oil companies can often go bankrupt and leave that infrastructure in the water for BOEM to clean up. So to avoid that, BOEM has a 20-year-old rule which says before a company can get a lease to drill, they had to prove that they can afford to clean it up. That's still the case, but the new update changed the criteria to measure a company's financial health. They made it a little bit stricter. So if companies don't meet that criteria, they'll have to put up a bond. And so that would mean BOEM would have the money to clean up the infrastructure so the burden doesn't get passed on to taxpayers. Right now, the federal government has to clean up between $40 and $70 billion worth of infrastructure, and they only have about $3.5 billion in bonds to pay for that. But the new criteria is harder for smaller oil companies to meet, and so they say they can't afford to get those bonds.
And that's where the lawsuit comes in?
Right. Louisiana, Mississippi, and Texas are all saying that the cost of these bonds will hurt their independent, small, and mid-sized oil companies, and not the major companies like Chevron and Shell. The lawsuit says independent companies produce about half of U.S. oil, and this rule will cause the loss of over 30,000 jobs. The main issue is these smaller companies are struggling to get the bonds. I spoke to Tracy Cohn, who's the CEO of one of those companies, W&T Offshore. He said one of the bonding companies they worked with asked for $250 million in collateral, which the company can't afford.
We employ about 390 people. We employ probably another couple of hundred of contractors. So for us, having to post all this collateral would cause the company to go bankrupt.
Basically, the plaintiffs are saying the rule will crush all these smaller oil companies, and there wasn't a problem with the old way of doing things.
So who supports the rule? Like, who is this good for?
Obviously, a lot of environmental groups support it. I spoke to Ava Ibanez Amador, an attorney with Earth Justice. That organization filed a brief on behalf of a bunch of environmental groups in support of the rule. She says it'll help make cleanup happen faster, which will protect coastal communities from the safety and environmental risks of leaving that infrastructure in the water.
The more infrastructure that goes in the water, the more infrastructure that will be left in the water to the detriment of mostly coastal communities if we don't have strong rules that make sure that the people that are going into the water, that they are able to pay the price of doing business in the Gulf of Mexico.
But she also says this is just a first step. There's still a ton of issues with enforcement of cleanup, and the GAO made a bunch of other recommendations for the federal government to handle this decommissioning problem.
And now it's time for Gulf States Gems, a series that shines a light on some of the treasures of the region. And for this week's gem, we're staying on the water. I have community engagement producer Nellie Beckett here to talk with me about some of the waterways of Alabama. Nellie, what's good?
Hey, Joseph, it's good to be here. Yeah, it's really cool learning about the freshwater biodiversity of Alabama. We've got more than any other state. We've got 132,000 miles of rivers and streams here. We've got the Cahaba, which is the primary source of drinking water for a fifth of Alabamians. We've got the Tallapoosa and the Coosa, which join to form the Alabama River. And we have water that isn't fresh as well, like Mobile Bay, the fourth largest estuary in the United States.
Yeah, I feel like some people kind of underestimate us, man, when it comes to water in Alabama. Like, some folks even forget we even have a beach down here.
That's true. Do you have any favorite waterways or places in Alabama, Joseph?
When I think about water in Alabama, I actually think about my time at camp when I was a kid, at Camp Clotnot on Lake Martin. At the camp, you got to spend time with other kids that deal with hemophilia. I used to hate it initially because, you had to stay there all week. But over time, I developed connections with other guys that had hemophilia. And we've grown into being adults, and we still maintain a connection.
That sounds really cool, Joseph. Did you do any water recreation on the lake while y'all were there?
Yeah, actually, I forgot to mention, we actually used to go tubing, go swimming in the lake. We never did any cliff diving or anything like that because, that'd be dangerous, especially with kids with a bleeding disorder. But yeah, stuff like that, and sometimes just being on the boat and just being on the water with the adults, the doctors, and nurses, and stuff like that were at the camp too.
Wow, Joseph, that sounds like a really meaningful experience on one of Alabama's beautiful lakes.
Yeah, it's something that I would take with me for the rest of my life, and I will never forget it.
Very cool.
And you can see pictures of Gulf States gems from across the region on our Instagram. And we want to hear about a place you consider a gem. It could be a restaurant, a bookstore, a natural park, or even a lake. Send us your suggestion. Email connect@gulfstatesnewsroom.org. This week's show was hosted by me, Joseph King, and it's cooked up by the Gulf States Newsroom team. Our theme music is by DJ Supreme. Special thanks to our partner stations, WBHM, Mississippi Public Broadcasting, WWNO, and WRKF. You can find us in your podcast feeds every Friday. Look us up and be sure to subscribe. Thanks for listening, and don't forget to steer your route.